What is art? How on earth do I know? I think my reaction to art is entirely instinctive. It's instinct informed by knowledge and experience. So my reaction to Anish Kapoor's power in the Olympic site is not that it is art in any shape or form, but that it is simply a sort of pastiche of the Eiffel Tower suffering from brewer's droop. Real art has to lift the spirit in some sense. It may not be much of a lift. It may simply be nostalgia. You're looking at a landscape and it reminds you of somewhere where you've had a holiday. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a perfectly estimable way of responding to a picture. It's something that you fit into your own experience. I bought a picture at Sotheby's one day and got a telephone call a couple of days later from the Tate saying, well, we couldn't quite make up our minds about that picture, but now that you've bought it, we think perhaps we ought to. So, and I said, well, you can have it for what I paid for it. What a fool! It has been very difficult, I'm not sure that I've done it, to throw off Antony's shadow. There are unkind people who say that I have got where I've got, wherever that is, entirely because of blunt affair. And I dare say to some extent that is true, or has been true, but I don't think it is any longer true. I think the early stages of the BBC's interest in me as a performer of some kind on programs to do with the arts was a direct consequence of the blunt affair. But the brevity of them, and their cutting off so sharply, was entirely the consequence of my being so critical of the BBC and all its works. The BBC is one of those institutions that trivializes the serious. And I was rather of the view that if I was contributing to a program on Leonardo da Vinci, indeed presenting it, that it should have some intellectual weight. And then there was a small television program which I thought actually had some point and purpose, and that was a quick visit, no more than 5 or 10 minutes, to a major exhibition in London. Unfortunately, with the girl whose name I can't remember, I'm very bad at remembering names, but she's the woman who did so many of the Big Brother series.
Davina McCall.
Davina McCall, yes. Well, before anybody had ever heard of her, she and I used to go to the National Gallery or Dulwich or somewhere and look at an exhibition and talk about Peter de Hoogh or Monet or whatever the case may be. And of course, if you compare her career with mine, you can see how unimportant it is to be serious. The voice at the other end said he was something to do with the Evening Standard, and that they were looking for a new art critic. He said, we sacked Richard Cork about 3 months ago, but readers actually want us to have an art critic, and we need somebody to take on the job. Richard, of course, none of us understood a word he said or wrote, so that's why we sacked him. We want somebody who will write intelligibly. Can you recommend anybody? I belong to that generation of people who are brought up to believe that virtue is always rewarded, and that you don't have to shake the apple tree in order to get the apples to come down. You just wait until one falls into your lap. And I thought on this occasion I'm bloody well not going to wait until an apple I'm going to ask for it, so I did. And the voice said, oh, we were hoping you'd say that. Come and see us at 12 o'clock this morning. Well, where is Mrs. Michelangelo? Where's Mrs. Leonardo? Where's Mrs. Raphael? Where's Mrs. Reynolds, for that matter? Where's Mrs. Gainsborough? Just look at anybody who is reasonably great and ask yourself, where is the woman who can match that? I think all this business about the equality of the sexes is just so much nonsense. And the idea of women priests, and worse still of women bishops, and that's exactly the same as great women artists, you know. Where is your great woman theologian? Where is your female doctor of the church? Where is your female St. Augustus?
What about women prime ministers?
Well, what about was there ever a more ruinous prime minister in the long run than Mrs. Thatcher? And I will never forget my stepfather in desperation giving me private lessons with one of the masters at school. And the thing I really enjoyed was sitting next to the master and the comforting arm that went up and down my back and round my shoulders and tickled that I really enjoyed. It didn't do much with my arithmetic. I used to play rugger. You're not an outsider there. And I hooked in the scrum, so very much the insider, as it were. But I think that's the only game in which I felt any kind of union with my peers, belonging to a team. I didn't see any point in writing an autobiography if I didn't confront the problem of my own sexuality, which is part of being an outsider, and did not deal, frankly, with what one does as it were. Sex is an enormously important formative element in our lives, and having formed us, we then have a drive, you know, this awful compulsion, which is stronger in certain circumstances than hunger. You know, get on with the fuck and never mind the dinner. Sorry. It's actually a word I think I want to bring back into common currency if it's there already. It's quite a good word for a certain kind of sex. Sex which is without obligation. You know? Yes. 80, I think you're entitled to be to examine your life. The damn thing is very nearly over, and you have a chance really to look at the whole of it. And writing it is a bit like giving yourself psychoanalysis, and it can be very painful. And like analysis, it should be frank. And there is no point in concealment. There is no benefit either to the reader or to yourself, the writer, if there is any element of concealment. So it's a perfectly frank memoir or exposure or whatever you feel like calling it. And at 80, I quite frankly don't care a hoot what anybody thinks anymore. So there. And I have a great many regrets about my life. You know, I would quite like not to have been queer. I would quite like not to have been an outsider. I would quite like to have been the Archbishop of Canterbury or the director of the National Gallery. I would like not to feel that I have wasted my life, as I do. I thought then, and I think now, that education should be about your leisure and not your career. I am dead against the sort of education that Mrs. Thatcher brought into play, that school is the training, the basic training of whatever you will do for a career. I think school and university are both there to broaden your mind, to open it to all sorts of intellectual and aesthetic and physical stimuli which it otherwise won't encounter. I think that you should come out of your years of education deeply literate. You should understand the language or languages that you speak. That you should know something about your history. You should know something about other people's history. You should know something about everything. You should be aware of everything that goes in to your cultural background. There was a nonsense story in the Private Eye a month or two ago about by having lunch with Yevgeny Lebedev, who was the young owner of the Evening Standard. And there is an element of truth in it, in that we did have lunch. And that at the end of lunch, when the conversation had really been rather difficult, stilted, I think is probably the polite word for it, I said to him, tell me, why are you giving me lunch? He said, oh, well, I wanted to have lunch with you, but I said, no, that's not good enough. And then he said, well, I really wanted to ask you if you perhaps, in your reviews, be kinder to my friends among the contemporary art world. And I said, no. So that much is true. I did not walk out in a huff.
Finished your lunch.
We finished our lunch, yes. There was a little sequel, but which I think was completely misunderstood by, if indeed it reached Private Eye. We walked together to the door of the restaurant which Lebedev owned. And it was raining outside, and it was about 400 yards from the offices of the Evening Standard. And he stood there and sort of did that, and a car manifested itself, a great it says something that it was a Chrysler, and not a Bentley or a Rolls. It was a Chrysler, a big, silver, shiny, showy piece of rubbish. And it drew up, and he got into it and drove away, leaving me on the pavement. So I started to walk back to the office, and there he was on the other side of the road in the great silver car, and here was I hobbling along in my crutches towards the office. He stuck in the traffic jam, me hobbling rather slowly, and we kept pace with each other all the way back to the office. And when I got to the door, he was just getting out of the Chrysler. So I think that was much funnier than the story in the Private Eye. Why did I go on to Loose End, and how was I invited? Well, I frankly don't know how or why I was invited, because I'm not a comic, and clearly it's a comic program, and I find I've been on it twice.
No, you used to be on it weekly, surely. You used to be
no, I was on it twice. A little of me goes a very long way. Don't laugh at your own jokes. Damien Hirst's bubble has not burst. I think there was a slight leak in the balloon, but it's certainly not coming down. Damien's problem is that he has become a pasticheur of his own ideas. There are no fresh ideas. He simply repeats what he's done before. Every single thing. His period of inventive genius was right at the beginning of his career. And what he now produces are very polished, literally, repetitions of what he did as a young man. Some while ago I was asked to look at the collection of Deutsche Bank, and I wandered around disconsolately looking at all this familiar rubbish. And eventually somebody who was about the size of, I can't remember his name, that enormous chancellor, Cole, yes, thank you, appeared and said, what do you think of our little collection? And I said, I think it's exactly what I'd expect a bank to collect. And he didn't know how to take it, and he said to the curator after, what did he mean? Well, I meant exactly what I said. It's exactly what you'd expect a bank to collect, because every other bank is collecting it. There is nothing to be said about Banksy. He's enormously clever, and he's backed by very skilled dealers. But there is no art in it. There is a certain amount of rather pathetic ability, but no art. There's a graffiti, a rather polished graffiti artist. Nothing more. There is no depth to it. There's a little wit, but that's not the same thing. It seems to me a great pity that people can introduce new forms of art. Installation, video, dance, sound, nothing. You know, pulling a bus along on a piece of string tied to a big toe. It's all dubbed art now, and that seems to me to make it nonsense, because we have two forms, broadly speaking, two forms of art, which are age-old, ancestral forms, which deserve to be left alone, painting and sculpture. And they still have something ahead of them, if only we could train people to paint now, if only we could train people to sculpt. But I think the art schools are letting it, in that area, the art schools are letting us down very badly. The old business of teaching students which end of the paintbrush has the whiskers on is no longer important in art schools.